From colossal fault lines that span thousands of miles to seismic cracks that fall deep into the earth, these fault lines reveal the immense power that is at work beneath our feet. In today's video, we're going to count down the top 15 largest earthquake faults in the world. Starting with number 15, the Himalayan Frontal Thrust. Alright, the Himalayan Frontal Thrust is a geologically significant fault system that spans the southern edge of the Himalayan mountain range, a region characterized by tectonic dynamism and seismic activity. The HFT marks the boundary between the Andean and the Eurasian tectonic plates, and it plays a crucial role in the ongoing collision and convergence between these two plates. This thrust fault is responsible for generating some of the world's most powerful earthquakes due to the immense pressure and stress resulting from the slow but relentless movement of the Andean plate beneath the Eurasian plate. As the Andean plate continues to push northward, it gets progressively trapped and uplifted against the Eurasian plate. This buildup of stress is eventually released in seismic events along the fault. The HFT has caused some pretty big earthquakes in recent years, like the 2005 Kashmir earthquake and the 2021 Sikkim-Nepal border earthquake, which were 7.6 and 5.9 respectively on the Richter scale. But the largest, most devastating came in the form of the 2015 Gorkha earthquake in Nepal, with a magnitude 7.8. That Gorkha earthquake highlighted the destructive potential of this fault, causing widespread devastation, loss of life, and even triggering avalanches on Mount Everest. Number 14, the Cascadia Subduction Zone. The CSZ, Cascadia Subduction Zone, is a big one. It extends for about 620 miles along the western coast of North America. It spans from northern California in the US through Oregon and Washington and continues into southern British Columbia in Canada. Its width varies, but generally extends for miles inland from the coast, encompassing both land and offshore regions. It gained some notoriety due to its association with a major historical earthquake known as the 1700 Cascadia earthquake. This event, estimated to have a magnitude of around 9.0, even caused a massive tsunami. The earthquake left behind evidence in the form of coastal land subsidence and uplifted marine terraces, which scientists have used to piece together the event's timeline and impact, and believe that these effects were felt all the way in Japan. The CSC is a subduction zone, whereby the oceanic Juan de Fuca plate is being forced beneath the North American plate. This subduction process generates significant stress along the fault line, which can lead to megathrust earthquakes and tsunamis. The movement of the Juan de Fuca plate under the North American plate also influences the overlying crust and mantle, contributing to the uplifting and formation of the Cascade volcanic arc. These volcanoes, such as Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, and Mount Hood, are stratovolcanoes that result from the melting of the Juan de Fuca plate as it descends into the mantle. Number 13, the Japan Trench Subduction Zone. Located off the eastern coast of Japan, this is a subduction zone of epic proportions, where the Pacific plate is being thrust beneath the North American plate and Eurasian plate with disastrous results. The constant movement has resulted in an array of colossal earthquakes, often exceeding magnitude 8 and even surpassing 9.0. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake, a monstrous magnitude 9.0 event, is one of the most infamous. Its massive rupture triggered a tsunami of unprecedented proportions, inundating coastal communities and causing catastrophic damage, including the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Drilling operations in this subduction zone have offered some insights into the dynamic of subduction zones. Through drilling, scientists have extracted sediment cores that serve as geological time capsules. These cores contain layers of sediment providing a record of past earthquakes, tsunamis, and climate conditions. This allows scientists to decipher the earthquake history of the region, improve earthquake forecasting models, and better understand the complex interactions at play. And with that understanding comes preparation. However, experts have been doing a lot more than drilling to get a deeper understanding. The exploration of this perilous region extends beyond it. Robotic technology has enabled researchers to delve to the deepest abysses of the trench, capturing images and data that shed light on the geophysical features of this subduction zone. However, such exploration is not without its challenges. The extreme pressures, frigid temperatures, and unpredictable conditions of the deep-sea environment make for a tough research project. Number 12, Alpide Belt Faults. The Alpide Belt Faults, an extensive network of fault systems that span across Europe, Asia, and Africa, form a deadly tapestry of tectonic and seismic activity. This belt's history dates back millions of years, and its effects are often felt across continents. The faults encompass a vast area stretching from the Atlantic Ocean through the Mediterranean, the Middle East, the Himalayas, and into Southeast Asia. This intricate web of faults is driven by the convergent, divergent, and transform motions of the African, Eurasian, Arabian, Indian, and Australian plates. These interactions have sculpted mountains, valleys, and basins, reshaping landscapes over millennia. They've also caused some massive quakes. The history of seismic activity within the Alpine belt is rich and tumultuous. The collision of tectonic plates and their movements have generated a spectrum of earthquakes, ranging from minor tremors to catastrophic events. The region is notorious for its large earthquakes that can reach magnitudes exceeding 8.0, often resulting in destruction and loss of life. Major earthquakes within the Alpine belt have left indelible marks on history. The 1556 Shaanxi earthquake in China, one of the most deadly in recorded history, resulted in hundreds of thousands of fatalities. The 1908 Messina earthquake in Italy generated tsunamis that devastated coastal towns, causing widespread destruction. More recently, the 2003 Bam earthquake in Iran with a magnitude of 6.6 claimed tens of thousands of lives and highlighted the seismic vulnerability of densely populated areas within the Alpine belt. Number 11. The Andean Subduction Zone. The Andean Subduction Zone is the colossal collision between the South American plate and the Nazca plate that sculpted the landscape of western South America. This subduction zone spans nearly 5,000 miles, running parallel to the Pacific coastline and carving a breathtaking panorama of towering mountains, deep valleys, and active volcanoes into the Earth. The region's geological saga is marked by seismic upheavals, volcanic eruptions, and tectonic dynamism that has shaped both the land and the lives of those inhabiting it. Needless to say, it's got a tumultuous history, but despite the earthly anger, this one is a little special. It stands as a remnant of the once supercontinent Pangaea. Major earthquakes within the Andean subduction zone have left a mark on the region's history. The 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded, reached a magnitude of 9.5 and unleashed a devastating tsunami that traveled across the Pacific Ocean. This event, along with others like the 2010 Maui earthquake, highlighted the region's seismic vulnerability, and it underscored the importance of preparedness and mitigation. The region's seismic profile is inextricably linked to its volcanic landscape. The Andes has a myriad of active volcanoes, sculpted by the magma generated as the Nazca Plate subducts. The volcanoes paint a geothermal canvas that spans from Colombia to Chile, with regions of concentrated volcanic activity punctuated by gaps known as volcanic gaps. These gaps result from the complexities of subduction, whereby different tectonic processes give rise to all sorts of volcanic activities. But the volcanoes here are some of the most unique in the world, known as black arc volcanoes. Black arc volcanism is a specific type of volcanic activity that happens in geological settings associated with subduction zones, where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another. It does differ from the more common volcanic activity that happens along the convergent plate boundaries, where a subducting plate creates a volcanic arc on the overriding plate. Number 10. The Aleutian Subduction Zone. Jutting beneath the North American plate in the North Pacific is the craggy Aleutian Subduction Zone. What we're looking at here is a prime example of convergent plate boundary activity, where the collision and interaction of tectonic plates leads to various geological phenomena, mainly earthquakes and volcanic activity. One of the most notorious tsunamis in history happened in 1946 after a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck the Aleutian Islands. This earthquake generated a massive tsunami that caused extensive damage and loss of life in Hawaii, Alaska, and other areas in the Pacific. Stretching from the Gulf of Alaska to the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia's Far East, the Aleutian Subduction Zone is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a horseshoe-shaped area around the Pacific Ocean known for its intense tectonic and volcanic activity. Along the Aleutian Subduction Zone, the Pacific Plate is slowly descending into the Earth's mantle beneath the North American Plate. More importantly, though, is the island arc created by the movement of these plates. This subduction process has initiated the formation of what's known as an island arc, a curving chain of volcanic islands that mirrors the curvature of the subduction trench. The Aleutian Islands are a stunning manifestation of this island arc, stretching like a string of pearls from the Alaska Peninsula towards Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. The magma generated as the Pacific Plate descends into the mantle rises to the surface, creating a volcanic chain marked by stratovolcanoes, volcanic islands, and seafloor spreading. All of this led to the creation of the Aleutian Trench. This Aleutian Trench runs parallel to the Aleutian Islands, marking the point where the Pacific Plate is subducting beneath the North American Plate. This trench is the subduction boundary where the two tectonic plates meet. As the Pacific Plate, an oceanic plate, is gradually forced beneath the North American Plate, it descends into the Earth's mantle along this trench. But everything going on within the trench is responsible for shaping the entire geological landscape of the region, making the entire subduction zone one of the most dangerously beautiful places on our planet. Number 9. The Garlock Fault. Alright, heading over to California, of course, we've got the Garlock Fault. This fault is one of the larger geological features to grace Southern California, stretching from the Mojave Desert in the east to the San Andreas Fault in the west. This transform fault marks the boundary between the North American Plate and the Pacific Plate, making it a crucial element of the complex tectonic puzzle that characterizes the region. The fault extends for approximately 160 miles across the southern part of California. It is the second longest fault in California and one of the most prominent geological features in the southern part of the state. It marks the northern boundary of the area known as the Mojave Block, as well as the southern end of the Sierra Nevada and the valleys in the westernmost basin and range province. This fault is known for its strike-slip motion, whereby the two sides of the fault move horizontally past each other. This motion can lead to earthquakes when the accumulated stress along the fault is suddenly released. The fault moves at a rate between 2 and 11 millimeters a year, with an average slip of around 7 millimeters. While most of the fault is locked, certain segments have been shown to move by aseismic creep, which is motion without resulting earthquakes. And while the Garlock Fault doesn't receive as much attention as the infamous San Andreas Fault, it does have the potential to generate anything from small, relatively insignificant tremors to large-scale earthquakes. So even if many Californians may not have heard of the Garlock Fault, they have certainly felt it. Notable earthquakes along this fault include the 1952 Kern County earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.3. This event caused significant damage in the region and resulted in several casualties. Another noteworthy event was the 1992 Landers earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.3 and caused widespread ground rupture, particularly along the Mojave-San Bernardino segment of the fault. Number 8. The Denali Fault. You can find the Denali Fault in Alaska. It extends for approximately 650 miles through the interior of the state, from the Gulf of Alaska to the south of the Yukon Territory in Canada to the north. The Denali's fault size and length are noteworthy, and that long stretch makes it one of the longest strike-slip faults in the world. This fault does play a pivotal role in tectonic activity of the region, and it's got a rich history of seismic events that have shaped the landscape that the 49th state is known for. The Denali Fault is a right lateral strike-slip fault, which means that the two sides of the fault move horizontally past each other. It marks the boundary between the Pacific Plate to the south and the North American Plate to the north. This type of fault is characteristic of transform boundaries, where the tectonic plates slide horizontally past each other due to the shear stress caused by their movement. Its movement is gradual, but it is significant, with an average slip rate of approximately 1 inch per year. This consistent movement can accumulate stress over time, potentially leading to the release of seismic energy in the form of earthquakes. When you've got a fault line as significant as the Denali, massive movement is gonna be felt. Notable earthquakes along this fault have left a mark on the region. One of the most significant ones was the 2002 Denali Fault earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.9. The earthquake's epicenter was located in the Alaska Range, and it caused widespread ground rupture, landslides, and plenty of infrastructure damage. From a geological perspective, the 2002 Denali Fault earthquake demonstrated the powerful impact of strike-slip faulting. The movement along the fault caused the Earth's surface to rupture, with some surface displacement exceeding 25 feet deep in places. That resulting rupture was approximately 209 miles long, and it cut through streams, divided forests, and opened chasms in roads, and it even generated fault traces visible across several glaciers. Moving on to number 7, the Aleutian Fault. Located in northwestern China, the Aleutian Fault runs through the eastern part of the Tibetan Plateau, extending for approximately 1,200 miles in a predominantly east-west direction. This fault is a key element of the intricate tectonic mosaic that characterizes Central Asia. The history of the region is intertwined with the collision of the Andean Plate and the Eurasian Plate. The Andean Plate, which was once a separate landmass, has been gradually moving northwards towards the Eurasian Plate. This movement has led to the uplift of the Tibetan Plateau and the creation of the Himalayan mountains, the world's tallest mountain range. The Aleutian Fault is one of the structures resulting from this immense tectonic collision. This right lateral strike-slip fault marks the boundary between the Eurasian Plate and a complex of mosaic microplates, including the North China Plate and the Tarim Plate. The Tibetan Plateau, an expansive and high-elevation region, is often referred to as the roof of the world. This uplift continues to influence the region's topography, climate, and of course, geological activity. The fault has an average slip rate of around 10 millimeters a year. This gradual movement accumulates stress along the fault line, which can be released in the form of earthquakes. The fault's seismic activity is an essential component of the broader tectonic processes that shape Central Asia. In fact, this fault was the cause of a big one, the 2001 Kunlun earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.8. Number 6. The East African Rift System. The East African Rift runs from the Afar Triple Junction in the north, where it meets the Red Sea Rift, down to Mozambique in the south. This geological marvel is a divergent plate boundary, a place where two tectonic plates are moving away from each other. It's a remarkable example of how the Earth's crust can split right on open, leading to the formation of new crust and the potential for the birth of a future ocean. It really makes it feel like we're existing on a living, breathing planet. The history of the East African Rift is linked to the breakup of the ancient supercontinent known as Gondwana. Around 200 million years ago, the supercontinent began to form, leading to the eventual separation of the African plate from the Indian plate. The East African Rift is essentially a continuation of this ancient rift system, whereby the African plate is being stretched and pulled apart along a network of faults and rift valleys. Geologically, the East African Rift is characterized by its extensional tectonics, which leads to the formation of normal faults. These faults allow the Earth's crust to sink down and create an elongated rift valley. As those rift valleys develop, they can eventually become ocean basins if the rifting process continues and new crust is generated. The East African Rift is divided into two main branches, the Eastern Rift and the Western Rift. The Eastern Rift runs along the border of Kenya and Tanzania, while the Western Rift extends through the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. The rift system is a ridiculous 3,700 miles long. The movement along this rift is slow but significant. The rift is pulling apart at a rate of a few millimeters to a few centimeters per year, but that's been going on for millions of years. This gradual movement accumulates stress along these faults, which can eventually result in earthquakes. Notable earthquakes associated with the East African Rift include the 2002 Molucca Sea earthquake with a magnitude of 7.6 and the 2007 Lake Tanganyika earthquake with a magnitude of 6.8. While the region doesn't experience frequent or massive earthquakes like those along some other tectonic boundaries, these events underscore the active tectonic processes happening within this rift. Number 5. Queen Charlotte Fault. It's never the Queen's fault, but what about the Queen Charlotte Fault? Alright, well, the Queen Charlotte Fault is an active transform fault that marks the boundary of the North American Plate and the Pacific Plate. The movement of these tectonic plates has led to the creation of the Queen Charlotte Islands and the complex underwater terrain of the region. The tectonic setting of the fault is within the larger context of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a region that's known for its active subduction zones, volcanic arcs, and tectonic plate interactions. This fault strike-slip motion contrasts with the subduction processes happening along other parts of the Ring of Fire, such as the Cascadia subduction zone to the south. The Queen Charlotte Fault is a biggie, about 745 miles long, extending from the northern tip of Vancouver Island in Canada to the southeastern coast of Alaska. The fault's slip rate is estimated to be around 1 inch per year. This gradual movement will accumulate stress along the fault and, as always, lead to earthquakes, some pretty big ones in fact. It sustains the highest known deformation rates among continental or continent-ocean transform systems globally, accommodating greater than 50 millimeters per year of dextral offset. Now that's a lot of jargon, but it may not seem like much. This movement in a single event can be tremendous and disastrous. The entire offshore length has ruptured in 7 greater than magnitude 7 events during the last century, making a cumulative historical seismic moment release higher than any other modern transform plate boundary system. Well, the Queen Charlotte Fault is a scary place to live and can be thought of as the Canadian equivalent of the San Andreas Fault. In fact, 6 large earthquakes have happened along this fault within the last 100 years, a magnitude 7 in 1929, a magnitude 8.1 in 1949, Canada's largest recorded earthquake, a magnitude 7.4 in 1970, a magnitude 7.8 in 2012, and a magnitude 7.6 in 2013. The 1958 Lithia Bay earthquake had a magnitude of 7.8 and it led to a major landslide, which resulted in a 1,700-foot tsunami that crashed into a mountainside, the largest ever recorded tsunami run-up. But that 2012 earthquake was remarkable for having been a thrust rather than a strike-slip tremor, more like the mechanism of the Cascadia subduction zone to the south. Recent detailed seafloor mapping has also revealed the expression of the Queen Charlotte Fault on the seafloor, including the truncation of canyons that happen along the continental slope. Number 4. The Main Central Thrust. The main central thrust is located in the heart of the Himalayas, extending across several countries including India, Nepal, Bhutan, and Tibet. It's part of a larger tectonic system where the Indian plate is colliding with the Eurasian plate, leading to the uplift of the Himalayas and the formation of the Tibetan Plateau. Now, as a thrust fault, the main central thrust is characterized by its reverse fault motion, where older rocks are pushed up and over younger rocks. This type of faulting is a result of the immense compression caused by the collision between these two plates. The Indian plate is thrusting northwards beneath the Eurasian plate, leading to the stacking and deformation of rock layers along the fault. The geological history here dates back all the way to the breakup of the ancient supercontinent known as Pangaea. Around 200 million years ago, during the Mesozoic era, the Indian plate began to separate from the southern supercontinent Gondwana. As it drifted northwards, the Indian plate gradually approached the Eurasian plate. Around 50 million years ago, the Indian plate initiated its collision with the Eurasian plate, setting into motion the geological process that would create the Himalayas. The convergence of these two massive tectonic plates generated immense compressional forces, leading to the uplift of the Earth's crust and the creation of massive mountain range. And at the heart of this tectonic collision lies the main central thrust. It isn't a single continuous fault line, but rather a complex network of faults that extend across the Himalayas. It plays a key role in the deformation of rock layers, causing folding, faulting, and intense pressure. Over millions of years, the repeated movement along the main central thrust has uplifted rocks that were once buried miles beneath the surface, showcasing the immense power of tectonic forces. The sheer size of the main central thrust is just amazing. It runs for approximately 1,550 miles and plays a pivotal role in the geological history of the Himalayas. It's responsible for massive uplift of rocks from deep within the Earth's crust to the surface, resulting in the formation of some of the world's highest mountains, including Mount Everest and K2. Number 3. The Great Sumatra Fault. The Great Sumatra Fault, also known as the Sumatra Subduction Zone, is a series of tectonic boundaries located in the Indian Ocean off the western coast of Sumatra in Indonesia. This fault zone plays a major role in the interactions between tectonic plates in the region, and it's responsible for some of the most powerful earthquakes and tsunamis in history. This subduction zone is where the Indo-Australian plate is being subducted beneath the Eurasian plate, and this process leads to the creation of deep open trenches and the potential for powerful seismic events. The fault's location along the boundary of these plates contributes to the region's intense seismic activity. When this stress is released suddenly, it can often result in megathrust earthquakes, some of the most powerful quakes recorded. These earthquakes are capable of producing massive tsunamis due to the vertical displacement of the seafloor. One of the most devastating events associated with the Great Sumatra Fault was the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami. The earthquake had a magnitude of around 9.1 to 9.3, and it generated a massive tsunami that affected several countries around the Indian Ocean. The waves caused widespread destruction and resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. The 2004 tsunami was so bad that it prompted the establishment of tsunami warning systems in the Indian Ocean region to detect and alert coastal areas about potential tsunamis. These systems rely on seismic data to quickly assess the threat and issue timely warnings to at-risk communities. This fault has also been responsible for other significant earthquakes as well. For example, the 2010 Mentawai earthquake and tsunami had a magnitude of 7.7 and generated tsunamis that affected the Mentawai Islands and western Sumatra. All of these events are tied to the Sumatra Trench. This trench is located in the east part of the Indian Ocean, and it's about 190 miles from the southwest coast of Sumatra and the Java Islands. It extends over 3,100 miles long, starting from Myanmar in the northwest and ending in Sumba Island in the southeast. For better or worse, the Great Sumatra Fault has changed the world and how we as humans view the raw power of nature. It is the driving force behind multiple natural disasters that dominated the headlines for weeks. Number 2. The Kermadec-Tonga Subduction Zone. The Kermadec-Tonga Subduction Zone is a convergent plate boundary that stretches from the North Island of New Zealand northwards. The formation of the Kermadec and Tonga plates started about 4 to 5 million years ago, and it serves as a reminder of the ever-changing planet. Today, the eastern boundary of the Tonga Plate is one of the fastest subduction zones, with a rate of up to 24 centimeters per year. This area is home to the second deepest trench in the world at about 10,800 meters, as well as the longest chain of submerged volcanoes. The plate boundary stretches from the southwest of the Kermadec Plate to the northwest tip of the Tonga Plate, with the Pacific Plate being subducted under the Kermadec and Tonga Plates. These plates are micro-oceanic plates in the Pacific Ocean, and they're bounded by the Australian and Pacific Plates to the west and east respectively. The Kermadec Plate begins in the northeast part of New Zealand and stretches northward to its contact with the Tonga Plate. The Tonga Plate begins about 1,500 miles north of New Zealand and stretches northward until the plate ends bounded by the Niafu'u Plate to the northwest and the Pacific Plate to the northeast. With the largest underwater volcano chain, the region surrounding the Kermadec-Tonga subduction zone is one of the most geologically diverse areas in the world. The Kermadec Sanctuary was proposed in 2015 by the Prime Minister of New Zealand, John Key, at the United Nations in New York, which would create an area off-limits to aquaculture, fishing, and mining. The sanctuary would be nearly 240,000 square miles, making it the world's largest and most significant fully protected area. The intention was to have the sanctuary in place, enacted by Parliament in November of 2016. In September 2016, the enactment of the Kermadec Sanctuary was delayed due to failed negotiations over the Maori people's rights. Number 1. The San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault, it stands as one of the most iconic geological features in the world. Stretching approximately 800 miles through California, this transform fault marks the boundary between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate. Its history of seismic activity and its influence on the landscape make it a focal point for understanding tectonic processes and the potential hazards they pose. At the heart of its significance lies its role as a transform fault, a boundary where two colossal tectonic plates, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, slide horizontally past each other. This horizontal motion, driven by the Earth's internal heat and convective currents, generates immense forces that build up stress along the fault line. Eventually, that accumulated stress finds release in the form of earthquakes, shaking the ground and shaping the land in the process. The San Andreas Fault is synonymous with seismic activity, making California one of the world's most earthquake-prone regions. Its history of earthquakes, notably the catastrophic 1906 San Francisco earthquake, has underscored its potential for devastation. The 1906 earthquake was a magnitude around 7.8. It wreaked havoc in San Francisco, altering the urban landscape and prompting fundamental changes in building codes and city planning. This event stands as a poignant reminder of the fault's power to reshape communities and infrastructure. Not all sections of the fault behave in the same way. Some areas exhibit a phenomenon known as aseismic creep, where the movement is gradual and imperceptible. In contrast, other segments remain locked for extended periods, accumulating stress until it's suddenly and dramatically released in earthquakes. This variation in behavior adds complexity to understanding the fault's dynamics and predicting seismic events. The San Andreas Fault is etched into the very fabric of California's landscape, leaving a mark in regions like the Carrizo Plain. Surface rupture features reveal the fault's direct impact, with visible offsets in the terrain. The fault's motion has contributed to the formation of prominent geological features, including the towering San Gabriel Mountains and the transverse ranges. These landforms remind us of the fault's ongoing activity and its role in shaping the environment. And beyond that scientific significance, the San Andreas Fault occupies a unique place in popular culture. Movies, documentaries, games, you name it. And then, of course, the fault raises the question of the Big One. The Big One encapsulates the fearsome prospect of a massive earthquake potentially exceeding magnitude 8. The lingering question, when will it strike, haunts residents, governments, and scientists alike. The seismic hazards associated with such an event are profound, ranging from widespread structural damage and disruptions to critical infrastructure to the triggering of landslides and tsunamis. The fault's varied behavior, with sections locked and accumulating stress, further adds to that complexity and the fear of predicting when the Big One will happen. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to our channel members.